So once we have our zones identified, there's a little bit of work to do to make sure that the HVAC works properly and is sized for each one of these different areas, zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. And if we look at our HVAC load sheet, you'll see that there's air handler and thermal sizing. That's how big does the big blower have to be, and how many tons of cooling or heating or BTU per hour will we need? It's really the size of your air conditioning and heating units. Once we're done with that, we need to look at how much air has to flow and how are we going to get that air there. So this is your airflow sizing, how much air is needed. And then once you know how much air is needed, there's a whole bunch of playing around. There's no real set way of figuring out where your air registers are. That's a supply diffuser, or a supply register is where the air supply for a room comes out. And that's what we're going to work with most. And so there's if you're very experienced, it becomes like kind of a matter of experience. You don't have that experience, so we're going to go over a way where you can just write down a whole bunch of options. It's sort of like the O-rings, and you'll write many options. Okay, so but for right now, we're going to do the air handler and thermal sizing. So we need to know how much air conditioning we're going to need. And we get that from what's called your Revit load support report. So let's go back to Revit. And if I look around on all this stuff down in my project browser, somewhere down on the bottom, I'm going to see reports and a load report. And there it is right there. And we're very fortunate that one of your colleagues has already made this for you. There's a video that will be posted that will show you how to do it, and I encourage you to watch how to do it. But it's all been done for you, this load report. Now, one of the first things you want to do is make sure that you know where your project is. So, to make sure that you're calculating correctly. So, under manage, you'll look at location, and it says I'm in Sacramento, and here's my latitude and longitude. Okay. So you'll go ahead and put that Sacramento latitude and longitude right there. I'm not going to type it in for you. That's something you have to do. Okay. So that's where you're going to go get this, because that's where we are. It's the location tab under manage, and you want to make sure that it's set right. Okay. Once it's there, we can go look at our load report, and there's tons of good information. Look at all of this information. We don't need all of it. If you were to do a real full mechanical review of this, you would need all this information. But we're doing what's called an architectural estimate. We need to just make sure that we set up sizes and spaces for all this stuff to go. And we just need to be pretty close. So we're going to do that. So for the whole building, you'll see that there's a lot of different things. There's peak cooling loads. That's really important, and you can see it's bold. And there's peak heating loads. Well, since we're going to use something called a dual system, we're going to have to use the biggest one of these two as we size. So we'll probably pick the peak cooling load, but you have to know what that is for your building. Peak cooling load, peak heating load. And for each cooling load, there's also CFM. Okay, so I'm gonna look in here for my peak cooling airflow right here. Peak cooling airflow. And I know you can't see it very well. That's okay. You're going to have to go in and read yours. Peak cooling airflow and peak heating airflow. And you'll see there's a spot for the whole building. BTU per hour. max, cooling, and heating. And that's what we're going to work with first. We're going to work with the BTU per hour peak load. Okay, so when I come back over here, that's this one right here. Peak cooling load BTU per hour. Okay, and peak heating load BTU per hour. Now that's cool, but many pieces of equipment in the United States work on something called tons. And a ton is how much energy it takes to melt 1 ton of ice or freeze 1 ton of ice in 1 hour. Okay, so you're going to take that BTU per hour and divide it by 12,000 to get that number. That's just a factor. It's a conversion factor. BTU per hour, and turn it to tons. And that way you'll have all the information for the whole building. And that's an important thing for compliance. But since we're going to have 3 zones, we're going to have 3 HVAC units. It's going to be like 3 air conditioner and heater units. Okay, so I need to see that also for each zone. So if I come down to the zone, okay, so here's zone 1. Zone 1. And look, here is somewhere in here. I'm going to find them. I know I can find them in here somewhere. Here it is. Calculated results. Peak cooling load for zone 1 and peak heating load for zone 1. Okay, so you're gonna write those down in zone 1. Peak cooling, peak heating, and then you're going to take the bigger one of those and use max. Okay, the biggest one of your cooling and heating is your max. And that's the number that we have to deal with. Okay, and you're going to do the same thing for zone 2. Your zone 2 summary calculated results. Peak cooling load, peak heating load. You'll write those down, peak cooling load, peak heating load, and you'll pick the bigger of those 2. Okay, and you'll do it in BTU per hour, which you get off of Revit, and you'll do it in tons. That's your BTU per hour divided by 12,000. And then you'll do the same thing for zone 3. Okay, here we go with zone 3, peak cooling load and peak heating load. Right? So that's how you do it. You're gonna write those all down here. So that's your HVAC load data worksheet for air handler and thermal sizing.